Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision.
Right, like a math equation or such.
Yeah, exactly, like engineering.
Right.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
It's comforting
Oh, crap.
because it's localized, right?
Yeah.
The problem is exactly where the pain is.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of, well, things like neurodevelopment, trauma, chronic fatigue, or generalized anxiety, and suddenly that x-ray machine is totally useless.
Oh, completely. The landscape gets incredibly murky.
Right. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape it's confusing. A patient comes in with severe depression, but they also have debilitating digestive issues.
Hmm.
Or another person has stubborn metabolic syndrome, but they're also suffering from chronic brain fog.
Hmm.
And for decades, medicine treated these as completely separate problems requiring completely separate specialists.
We silo the body. I mean, the psychiatrist took the brain, the endocrinologist took the metabolism, and the gastroenterologist took the stomach.
Exactly. And that murky, interconnected landscape is exactly what we are wading into today. So welcome back to the deep dive. To you, our listener, our resident learner.
We're glad you're here.
We know you are always looking for those foundational aha moments that tie disparate fields of science together without getting bogged down in impenetrable jargon.
Right, the stuff that actually matters.
Yeah. Today, we have a custom mission tailored just for you. We are going to map out the profound, life-altering relationship between your gut microbiome, your metabolic health, your mental well-being, and ultimately, your longevity.
And the material we're synthesizing today, I mean, it completely shatters that siloed approach to medicine we just talked about.
It really does.
The goal here is to connect the dots across all these disciplines to show you that your gut isn't just a passive digestive tube. It is a highly active, incredibly sophisticated control center that dictates almost everything about how you feel and function.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are exploring the anatomy of what scientists literally call the second brain.
The second brain. It's a great term.
We're going to look at how psychological stress acts as a biological bomb on your gut, the precise cellular mechanisms linking your bacteria to metabolic syndrome and mental illness, and how specific lifestyle levers like diet and aerobic exercise can physically reshape this internal ecosystem to help you live a longer life.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale we're dealing with, I want you to picture what's behind me right now.
Okay.
Imagine a stunning, microscopic 3D visualization of a bustling microbial ecosystem.
Like a rainforest or something.
Exactly like a rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
A dense, vibrant, highly competitive rainforest of trillions of organisms interacting, fighting for territory, cooperating, and communicating through chemical signals. That entire universe is what you carry inside you every single day.
It's a wild shift in perspective, honestly. Most of us grew up thinking of the gut as just like a simple plumbing system.
Right. Food in, waste out.
Food goes in the top, enzymes break it down, we extract the energy, and the waste goes out the bottom.
Yeah.
But the biological reality of the enteric nervous system, the ENS, it completely rewrites that narrative.
It does.
The ENS is the neurological network embedded directly in the lining of the gastrointestinal system, and it contains roughly 500 million neurons.
500 million. I mean, just to put that in perspective, that is roughly the number of neurons you would find in the brain of a highly intelligent animal.
Like a dog or a cat.
Yeah, exactly. You essentially have the equivalent of a golden retriever's brain wrapped entirely around your intestines.
Which naturally raises the question of resource allocation, because neurological tissue is incredibly expensive for the body to maintain.
Oh, extremely. It requires massive amounts of blood flow and energy.
So why on earth would evolution put so much computing power in our stomachs rather than keeping it all centralized in the skull?
Well, because eating is arguably the most dangerous thing we do on a daily basis.
Wait, really? We don't usually think of a sandwich as a threat level red.
Not in the modern world, perhaps. But from an evolutionary standpoint, it is incredibly dangerous. Think about it. Every time you swallow a piece of food, you are taking a foreign substance from the chaotic outside world. A world heavily populated with pathogens, bacteria, environmental toxins, and viruses. And you're placing it directly inside your body's core.
Oh, wow.
The gut has to act as the ultimate, highly intelligent gatekeeper.
So it's basically a border patrol?
Exactly. It's border patrol.
Oh.
Like your skin, the gut lining must stop potentially dangerous invaders from crossing into your bloodstream. But unlike your skin, which is mostly used a physical barrier, The gut lining has to be permeable.
Because it has to let the good stuff in?
Right. It has to let microscopic nutrients through while simultaneously keeping microscopic toxins out. It has to make millions of complex chemical decisions every minute.
That's a lot of processing power.
It is. That level of triage requires local computing power. So evolution located a massive, highly sophisticated defensive nervous system right there on the front lines.
And we actually feel this localized nervous system operating all the time, even if we don't recognize what's happening mechanically.
Oh, for sure.
Like, think about the classic sensation of getting butterflies in your stomach. When you get nervous before a big presentation or you experience a sudden surge of anxiety, you get that distinct, fluttering, almost hollow sensation in your gut. We use it as a metaphor for nervousness, but it's a very real physiological event driven entirely by the autonomic nervous system.
Precisely. When your brain perceives a threat, even a psychological one like public speaking, it initiates a fight or flight response.
Right.
Your autonomic nervous system instantly calculates that digesting your lunch is no longer a priority. The ENS rapidly diverts blood flow away from your gastrointestinal tract and reroutes it to your skeletal muscles so you can run or fight.
So it's literally stealing blood from your stomach to give to your legs.
Exactly. That sudden ischemia, that drop in blood flow in the gut, is physically registered by those 500 million neurons as that fluttering butterfly sensation.
It's incredible that this happens completely outside of our conscious awareness, much like the beating of our heart. But as complex as those 500 million human neurons are, they really just represent the hardware of the gut, right?
Right. There's just the physical structure.
The software, the actual operating system of this environment is the microbiome itself. Let's really define the sheer mass of this ecosystem, because the numbers redefine what it means to be human.
What's fascinating here is just the sheer volume we're talking about. The microbiome is the complex internal ecology of microorganisms that thrives within us.
Okay.
By physical weight, it makes up about 4 to 5 pounds of your body mass.
Wait, 4 to 5 pounds, like carrying around a bag of sugar?
Yep. So roughly 2% of your total body weight is just bacteria, fungi, and viruses. But the cell count is where it gets staggering. These microbial cells outnumber your human cells by a ratio of roughly 10 to 1.
10 microbial cells for every one human cell. That is, that's absurd.
And genetically, it's an even more overwhelming disparity. The human genome contains about 20,000 to 25,000 protein-coding genes. The collective genomes of the microbes in your gut contain over 3 million genes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The microbiome holds roughly 150 times more genetic content than your entire human DNA sequence. It is so vast, so biochemically complex, and so deeply integral to our survival that modern medical science now widely considers it to be an endocrine organ in and of itself.
I have to pause here because looking at those numbers induces a bit of an existential crisis.
It usually does.
If I am carrying around 5 pounds of foreign bacteria and they outnumber my own cells 10 to 1 and they possess 150 times more genetic instructions than I do, who is really in charge here?
That is the million-dollar question.
Am I an autonomous human being, or am I just a highly sophisticated bipedal biological taxi designed to carry microbes around?
It's a brilliant philosophical question, and the biological reality is that the line between human and microbe is infinitely blurrier than we ever assumed.
Yeah.
We aren't just hosting them. We have forged a profound, obligatory symbiotic relationship over millions of years of coevolution. We provide them with a warm, nutrient-rich, stable habitat.
And in return?
In exchange, they perform a breathtaking array of physiological functions that our own human DNA simply never bothered to learn how to do.
So we basically outsource the labor.
We completely outsourced it. For instance, they heavily govern our immune system. In fact, 70 to 80% of your entire immune system's active cells are physically located in the gut lining.
Wow, 80%.
Up to 80%, yeah. And they're in constant dialogue with these microbes. The microbes train the immune cells on what to attack and what to tolerate. They detoxify the body by breaking down foreign substances.
Like xenobiotics.
Exactly. They synthesize vital micronutrients, like B vitamins for cellular energy and vitamin K for blood clotting. They regulate systemic inflammation. They even determine how our bodies utilize carbohydrates and store fat.
It's a full-time job.
It is. In integrative medicine, this highly collaborative environment is referred to as the bioterrain.
The bioterrain. I like that. It's the internal playing field where our human cells and these trillions of microbes negotiate, interact, and organize the biochemical state of the body.
Right.
So if this bioterrain, this massive second brain operating in our gut, is so incredibly powerful, we have to look at the communication infrastructure.
The wiring.
Yeah, the wiring. How exactly does this gut brain talk to the brain inside our skull? Because we know they're in constant contact, which brings us to the architecture of the gut-brain axis.
This is where old medical paradigms truly get flipped upside down. The primary superhighway connecting the gut and the brain is the vagus nerve.
Okay, the vagus nerve.
It's the longest cranial nerve in the body. It's a thick, wandering bundle of fibers that runs all the way from the brainstem down through the neck, touching the heart and lungs, and webbing out extensively across the entire abdomen.
And historically, we viewed this nerve almost exclusively as a top-down command channel, right? Like the brain shouting instructions down to the organs. Heart, slow down. Lungs, breathe deeper. Stomach, secrete more acid.
Exactly. We viewed the brain as the absolute monarch, but neuroanatomical research reveals a completely different reality. Roughly 90% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve carry sensory signals from the gut up to the brain, not the other way around.
That is wild, 90%. So it's like a 10-lane highway, and 9 of the lanes are heading north.
Exactly.
The gut is constantly uploading data to the brain, telling it what to do, how to feel, and what to perceive about the state of the body.
And the language they use to communicate across this highway relies heavily on neurotransmitters.
Which are the chemicals we usually associate with the brain, right?
Right. We normally associate them strictly with synaptic gaps in the brain itself, but we now know that gut bacteria are actively manufacturing, regulating, and utilizing these vital brain chemicals right down in the intestines.
Let's break down exactly which chemicals we're talking about, because this completely shifts the framework for understanding mood and behavior.
Let's do it.
Take serotonin, for example. It is the classic feel-good neurotransmitter. It regulates mood, appetite, sleep cycles, and just general well-being. If you ask the average person where serotonin is made, they would point to their head.
Yep. But 95% of the body's serotonin is manufactured in the gut.
95%.
Yeah. Specialized cells in the intestinal tract called endochromaffin cells produce it, but their production levels are heavily dictated by the specific bacteria living nearby.
So the bacteria are telling the cells how much to make.
Exactly. And it's not just serotonin.
What about GABA? Gamma-aminobutyric acid.
GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's the calming chemical.
I feel like the brakes on a car.
Yes, the brakes. It mutes excessive neuronal firing, normalizes erratic brainwaves, and is absolutely essential for keeping anxiety and panic in check. It allows your nervous system to return to a baseline stable state so you can recover from stress.
And where does that come from?
Research shows that specific strains of gut bacteria, notably within the Bifidobacterium family, secrete massive amounts of GABA directly into the gut environment.
Wow. And glutamate, the counterpart to GABA, which is vital for cognition, learning, and forming memories, is also produced here, right?
Yes, sis.
There's even a fascinating mechanism in the research involving a specific bacterium called Bifidobacterium infantis.
Oh, that's a great example.
The text highlights that this specific microbe doesn't just produce neurotransmitters directly, it alters the availability of raw materials. It does a fantastic job of making tryptophan available in the blood.
And tryptophan is the essential amino acid precursor required to synthesize serotonin.
Right. So if your bioterrain is missing Bifidobacterium infantis, you simply don't get the raw materials absorbed into your system to make the chemicals that keep you from falling into depression.
It's literally a supply chain issue originating in the colon.
That is just so profound.
It is. And this brings us to a really deep realization regarding mental health. If we look at psychiatric illness through the lens of the gut-brain axis, the old trope you hear everywhere, that depression or anxiety is merely a chemical imbalance in the brain, is just woefully incomplete.
Right.
Psychiatry has recognized for decades that the immune system and systemic inflammation play a massive driving role in mental illness, from major depressive disorder to schizophrenia. And where is 80% of the immune system residing?
In the gut.
Exactly. The gut is ground zero for the body's inflammatory response. Therefore, it is ground zero for mood-related issues. If the gut is inflamed, the brain is inflamed.
This makes the mechanism behind modern antidepressants seem almost backwards.
How so?
Well, medications like SSRIs are designed to artificially trap serotonin in the synaptic clefts within the brain to boost its activity.
Right.
But if 95% of that chemical is produced in the gut, and its underlying availability is governed by bacterial populations, Trying to fix depression by only tweaking the brain's receptors is like trying to fix a water shortage by changing the shower head when the main reservoir is completely dry.
That is a perfect analogy. It's treating the symptom downstream rather than the source upstream. And we see this bidirectional communication beautifully and tragically illustrated in functional gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel syndrome or IBS.
Oh, yeah. The overlap between IBS and mental health is staggering. The research states that 50 to 90% of patients who seek treatment for IBS also suffer from overlapping psychiatric conditions.
Predominantly anxiety, major depression, or PTSD.
Right. And for a long time, the medical consensus was essentially dismissive. Like, of course you're anxious and depressed. You have chronic stomach pain and diarrhea. Being thick makes you sad.
But that completely missed the neurological reality. The relationship isn't just behavioral, it is deeply physiological.
Right. The data shows that IBS patients actually have an altered neurological baseline. They show an increased activation of pain circuits in the brain itself.
Right.
Their brain's threshold for perceiving pain has been artificially lowered by the constant barrage of signals coming up the vagus nerve. So normal, everyday peristalsis, the standard movement of gas and fluid through the GI tract.
Stuff that wouldn't even register in a healthy person's consciousness.
Exactly. It is processed by an IBS patient's hypersensitized brain as unbearable, agonizing pain.
It is a profound disturbance in the gut-brain axis. Here's the mechanism. Chronic dysbiosis or inflammation in the gut lining causes the local immune cells to secrete highly inflammatory messenger proteins called cytokines.
Okay, cytokines.
These cytokines travel through the bloodstream and they have the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the brain, they alter neuroplasticity. They physically induce depressive behaviors and hypersensitize the pain receptors. The gut literally rewires the brain to feel more pain.
So, if the gut can initiate this cascade, sending inflammatory distress signals up to the brain to cause anxiety, depression, and pain sensitization, what happens when the sequence is reversed?
What do you mean?
Like, what happens when the brain experiences severe psychological stress first? Say you're enduring a brutal divorce or financial ruin or dealing with unresolved trauma. Does the brain strike back at the gut?
It absolutely does, and strikes back with devastating ecosystem-altering force.
This is where we have to dive into psychological stress, which acts as the microbiome's absolute worst enemy. How does an abstract thought, a persistent worry about a deadline, translate into literal physical damage to a microscopic ecosystem in your intestines?
The translation mechanism is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, commonly known as the HPA axis.
The HPA axis.
Yes, this is the body's primary hardwired stress response system. When you perceive a threat, and to the brain, there is little chemical difference between a physical predator chasing you and the looming anxiety of losing your job. Your hypothalamus sounds the alarm.
Which is a tiny almond-sized region deep in the brain, right?
Exactly. It's the central command initiating the launch sequence.
I see.
The hypothalamus releases a hormone that triggers the pituitary gland just beneath it. The pituitary then releases its own hormone into the bloodstream, which travels all the way down to your adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys.
And the adrenal glands are the heavy artillery in this scenario.
Oh, without a doubt. The adrenals flood your systemic circulation with glucocorticoids, primarily cortisol, which is your main stress hormone.
Right.
They also release catecholamines like epinephrine and dopamine. This biochemical flood is entirely designed to prepare your body for immediate fight or flight. Your heart rate accelerates, your pupils dilate, blood pressure spikes, and energy substrates like glucose are dumped into the blood so your muscles have immediate fuel.
That cascade is great if you need to outrun a bear for 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
But what does that flood of stress hormones do to our internal bioterrain if it's chronically elevated week after week? Because there was a specific study on this in the research that is genuinely terrifying.
I know exactly the one you're talking about.
Researchers found that exposing the gut microbiome to elevated levels of these stress hormones can increase the populations of harmful, opportunistic gut bacteria by a factor of 10,000.
A 10,000-fold explosion.
And it intensifies their infectiousness, their ability to cause disease in under 24 hours. Just by being highly stressed, you can trigger a 10,000-fold multiplication of bad bacteria literally overnight.
And as those harmful populations explode, they crowd out and decimate the beneficial species. Another fascinating observational study looked at healthy college students.
Oh, the exam study.
Yes. Researchers sequenced their microbiomes during a relaxed semester period and then again during the intense, high-stress period of their final exams.
And what happened?
During exam week, Their populations of highly beneficial lactic acid bacteria completely plummeted. The psychological stress alone starved out the good flora.
I was trying to conceptualize this mechanism, and the best analogy I could think of is viewing your bioterrain as a garden.
Okay, I like that.
You have your beautiful vegetables and flowers, which are the beneficial bacteria, and then you have some normal, everyday weeds.
Right.
In microbiome literature, these weeds are called pathobionts. Under normal conditions, they are harmless. They just hang out in small numbers. They don't cause disease.
Like annoying teenagers, basically.
Exactly. But a psychological trauma or chronic stress acts like pouring high-grade fertilizer specifically engineered for the weeds. The stress hormones literally act as signaling molecules that mutate these harmless weeds into dangerous, invasive, disease-causing pathogens.
And this mechanism involves something called quorum sensing. Bacteria communicate with each other, but they also have receptors that can literally listen to human stress hormones.
Wait, they can hear our hormones?
Essentially, yes. When they detect high levels of norepinephrine or cortisol in your gut tissue, the pathodionts interpret that as a signal that the host's immune system is suppressed and vulnerable.
Wow.
It triggers a change in their genetic expression, causing them to multiply rapidly and become virulent.
They realize the guards are asleep, so they storm the castle.
Exactly. But the collateral damage goes far beyond just shifting the population ratios. If we connect this to the bigger picture, chronic stress physically degrades the architectural integrity of the gut itself. It breaks down the intestinal barrier.
We're talking about the phenomenon commonly known as leaky gut, or in medical terms, intestinal permeability. How does stress physically punch holes in the gut?
The lining of your gut is astonishingly thin. It is only a single layer of epithelial cells thick.
Just one cell thick.
Just one. These cells are glued together by proteins called tight junctions. This single cell layer is supposed to act as a highly selective, intelligent filter. It allows microscopic, fully digested nutrients to pass through into the bloodstream, but it strictly blocks larger, undigested proteins, toxins, and whole bacteria.
Makes sense.
But chronic exposure to elevated cortisol, combined with the localized inflammation caused by that bacterial dysbiosis we just talked about, causes those tight junction proteins to degrade.
So the glue just dissolves.
The glue dissolves, and microscopic gaps open up between the cells. The barrier is compromised. When that happens, endotoxins that belong strictly inside the colon are allowed to cross over and leak directly into your systemic blood circulation.
And the most dangerous of these toxins is something called lipopolysaccharide, right? Or LPS.
Yes, LPS.
LPS is a critical piece of this puzzle to understand. It's not a poison that bacteria actively shoot at us. It's actually a structural component of the bacteria themselves, right?
Correct. LPS forms the outer membrane of certain types of microbes known as gram-negative bacteria. As long as LPS stays safely inside the gut lumen, it's generally fine.
Okay.
But when the gut becomes leaky and LPS slips into the bloodstream, it is an absolute biochemical catastrophe.
Because the immune system is highly sensitized to it.
Highly sensitized. Your immune cells have specific receptors, Toll-like receptor 4, that are designed to detect LPS. When they detect it in the blood, the immune system assumes you have a massive, life-threatening systemic infection.
So it goes nuclear.
It sounds the highest possible alarm, triggering a massive wave of systemic inflammation throughout your entire body.
And because it's in the bloodstream, that inflammatory fire spreads everywhere, including up into the brain.
Yes, that LPS-induced neuroinflammation is now heavily implicated as a driving factor in severe, life-altering neurological conditions. We're seeing strong links between this specific inflammatory pathway and the onset of dementia, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, and treatment-resistant major depression.
Let me just summarize this loop, because grasping this causality is the ultimate aha moment of this entire biological system.
Go for it.
You experience psychological stress. The HPA axis floods your gut with cortisol. The cortisol acts as a signal that mutates harmless bacteria into aggressive pathogens. The pathogens cause local damage, dissolving the tight junctions of your gut lining.
Right.
The compromised lining leaks LPS toxins into your blood. The LPS triggers massive systemic inflammation. That inflammation crosses into your brain, physically altering your neuroplasticity to make you more depressed, more anxious, and less capable of handling stress, which starts the exact same cycle all over again, but with even more ferocity.
It is a profound, self-perpetuating cycle of biological degradation.
Yeah.
And the devastation of this systemic inflammation doesn't just manifest in our mood or our cognitive decline. This exact same inflammatory cascade completely derails our cellular metabolism too.
Which provides the perfect transition into our next major area of exploration, metabolic syndrome and the ecosystem's imbalance, or
Yeah.
dysbiosis. To ground us, let's define metabolic syndrome, because it's not a single disease, but rather a cluster of dangerous conditions happening simultaneously.
Yes, metabolic syndrome, or METS, is a constellation of 5 specific risk factors. If you have 3 or more, you are diagnosed with the syndrome.
What are the factors?
They are a large waist circumference, indicating visceral fat, high blood pressure, elevated fasting blood sugar, indicating insulin resistance, high triglycerides, and low HDL, which is the good cholesterol.
Okay.
Having this syndrome puts you at an exponentially higher risk for severe cardiovascular disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes.
And historically, the medical community framed this entirely as a behavioral failing, like a simple math problem. You eat too many calories, you don't burn enough calories on the treadmill, therefore you get fat and your metabolism breaks.
The thermodynamic model of obesity, calories in, calories out.
But the data mapping the microbiome reveals that the real puppet masters behind metabolic syndrome might actually be the bacteria. The calories matter, sure, but who is processing those calories matters just as much. And it largely comes down to the balance of 2 dominant phyla of bacteria in your gut, firmicutes and bacteroidetes.
These 2 major groups make up almost 90% of your total gut microbiota, and the ratio between them is a critical biomarker. Extensive clinical research shows that a high ratio of firmicutes to bacteroidetes is strongly, consistently linked to obesity, systemic inflammation, and the onset of diabetes.
Why? What exactly are the firmicutes doing differently that causes our human bodies to store more fat?
They are simply vastly more efficient at extracting energy from the food you eat.
Wait, how?
Well, humans lack the digestive enzymes required to break down many complex plant polysaccharides. Normally, those complex carbs would just pass through the system as waste. But firmicutes possess specialized enzymes that can ferment and break down those tough fibers into absorbable monosaccharides.
So if you and I sit down and eat the exact same bowl of oats, but your microbiome is heavily dominated by firmicutes, your body will actually extract and absorb significantly more net calories from those exact same oats than my body will.
Exactly. They drastically increase your energy harvest. Even if your caloric intake looks identical to someone else's on paper, your biological reality is that you are absorbing more energy.
That is incredibly frustrating for anyone trying to lose weight.
Oh, it gets even more insidious. Higher populations of firmicutes can actually alter your human genetic expression.
What? Really?
Yes, they produce metabolites that signal your liver and adipose tissue to increase lipid storage and downregulate the genes responsible for fat oxidation. You're chemically instructing your body to hoard fat.
When you look at it that way, the obvious clinical answer seems to be a scorched earth approach. Just nuke the firmicutes, right? Drive them as close to zero as possible to prevent metabolic problems and cure obesity.
Well, this is where the biological complexity demands critical thinking. We can't treat the microbiome like a comic book, where microbes are simply heroes or villains.
Right.
There's a fascinating paradox in the literature. While many studies confirm that reducing the overall ratio of firmicutes aids in significant weight loss, top researchers in the field, like Patrizia Brigidi, have pointed out a critical nuance.
What's the nuance?
Certain species within the firmicutes phylum are actually highly beneficial and produce potent anti-inflammatory substances. And demographic studies show that as humans reach advanced age, we tend to naturally lose these specific protective firmicute strains.
Interesting.
The loss of these protective strains is actually a major driver of the systemic inflammation associated with getting older.
So it's not a binary good versus bad scenario. It's about a delicate, highly personalized ecological balance. You need the right strains of firmicutes in the right amounts, kept in check by the bacteroides.
Precisely. Dysbiosis is rarely just the sudden presence of a bad bacteria. It is almost always the loss of ecological balance. It's what happens when one species overgrows its niche because its competitors were wiped out.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because there are some unambiguous good guys in this ecosystem when it comes to regulating metabolism. And the true heroes aren't necessarily the bacteria themselves, but the chemical byproducts the bacteria manufacture.
Yes.
The literature talks extensively about SCFA's short-chain fatty acids.
If there is a silver bullet in the microbiome discussion, it is the short-chain fatty acids. They are the unsung metabolic peacekeepers of the human body.
How are they made?
When you consume dietary fiber, The tough, complex carbohydrates found in vegetables, legumes, and whole grains that your human enzymes cannot digest,
Yeah.
that fiber travels entirely intact all the way down to your colon.
Where the microbes are waiting.
Exactly. The beneficial microbes feast on this fiber. They ferment it. And the primary biochemical byproduct of this bacterial fermentation process is the massive production of short-chain fatty acids, primarily three types: butyrate, acetate, and propionate.
Let's focus on butyrate because its role seems almost miraculous. What do these SCFAs actually do once they are produced in the colon?
They execute a trifecta of vital physiological functions. First, butyrate is the primary preferred energy source for the colonocytes, the human cells that line your colon.
Oh, so it feeds the cells themselves.
Yes, it provides them with the energy they need to rapidly regenerate and maintain the tight junctions we discussed earlier. So abundant butyrate equals a strong gut barrier, effectively preventing leaky gut and keeping LPS toxins out of the blood.
So it repairs the physical wall.
Yes. Second, SCFAs actively bind to specific receptors on immune cells, signaling them to downregulate the production of inflammatory cytokines. They literally act as a systemic fire extinguisher for inflammation.
Wow. And the third function?
Third, they have a profound impact on endocrinology.
Wow.
They travel to the liver and the pancreas, where they sensitize your human cells to insulin. This helps your body shuttle glucose out of the blood and into the muscles efficiently, preventing the insulin resistance that leads to type 2 diabetes.
So the cascading logic is undeniable. Without adequate dietary fiber, the bacteria have nothing to ferment. Without fermentation, we don't produce SCFAs. Without SCFAs, the gut lining starves and becomes leaky.
Right.
And then systemic inflammation runs rampant, and the body becomes resistant to insulin, accelerating metabolic syndrome.
That is the exact mechanism of modern metabolic disease.
Which leads us to the critical million-dollar question for the listener. If our modern, highly stressful, low-fiber lives are actively driving us toward obesity, chronic anxiety, and depression by ruining our microbiome, how do we actively change the bioterrain?
That is the essential pivot from understanding the pathology to implementing actionable clinical interventions. And the fundamental truth, echoed universally across microbiome research, is that modern humans are, quite literally, starving our microbial selves.
We are starving them of complex fiber.
We are. The standard Western diet is hyper-processed, stripped of its fibrous cellular matrices, and notoriously low in diverse plant matter.
Right.
If you don't feed the specific microbial strains that produce SCFAs, those populations are outcompeted by opportunistic bacteria, and they die off. To rebuild the bioterrain, we have to fundamentally shift toward diets rich in diverse fermentable fibers frameworks, like the traditional Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet.
Which are heavy in legumes, diverse vegetables, whole grains, and nuts.
Yes. These diets provide the exact substrates required to feed the beneficial bacteria, which in turn drastically increases SCFA production, lowering inflammation, repairing the intestinal wall, and, through the gut-brain axis, significantly reducing symptoms of depression and anxiety. Diet is the most direct, powerful lever you can pull every single day.
I think most people fundamentally accept the dietary piece. You are what you feed your microbes. But I want to push back on the other half of the standard medical advice: exercise.
Okay.
We are always told to eat fiber and exercise for weight loss. But does physical exercise actually change the bacterial architecture of the gut? Or are we just conflating two different things, like eating fiber feeds the bugs and exercising just burns the calories?
It's a vital distinction to make, and the science has a definitive and surprising answer. Aerobic exercise physically reshapes the gut microbiome, completely independent of dietary intake.
Really? I would assume athletes just have a different microbiome because they eat massive amounts of high-quality food to fuel their training. How do we know the movement itself changes the bugs?
We know this thanks to incredibly rigorous studies, most notably a landmark 2014 study out of University College Cork involving professional rugby players.
Rugby player.
Yeah. The researchers wanted to isolate the variables. They took stool samples and sequenced the gut microbiomes of 40 elite professional rugby players. They then compared that data against two control groups of healthy, non-athlete men. One group was of normal body weight, and the other group was overweight.
And what did the genetic sequencing reveal?
The physiological differences were staggering. The rugby players possessed vastly greater microbial diversity than any of the non-athletes, regardless of the non-athlete's body weight.
Okay.
But the most crucial finding was the predominance of a specific bacterial family called Akkermansiaceae.
Let's spotlight that one. Why is Akkermansiaceae so important?
The primary species in this family, Akkermansia mucinifila, is a fascinating microbe. It actually feeds on the mucus layer that coats your gut lining.
Wait, it eats the mucus barrier? That sounds bad.
It does sound bad, but paradoxically, by feeding on it, it stimulates the human cells to produce a much thicker, healthier mucus barrier. High levels of Akkermansia are strongly inversely correlated with obesity and diabetes, meaning if you have a lot of it, you are highly unlikely to be obese.
And the rugby players had massive amounts of it.
They did. The researchers concluded that regular, strenuous aerobic exercise physically alters the gut environment, perhaps through localized changes in gut motility, core temperature, or reduced transit time, in a way that actively lowers the inflammatory firmicutes to bacteroidetes ratio and dramatically fosters the growth of Akkermansia.
That reframes exercise entirely. When you go for a brisk 45-minute run, you shouldn't just be thinking about the 400 calories you burned.
Not at all.
You are actively, physically cultivating a garden of specific bacteria that will continually act to keep you lean, protect your gut barrier, and lower your systemic inflammation long after the run is over.
Precisely. Exercise is a direct modulator of the bioterrain. Now, for individuals suffering from severe entrenched dysbiosis, where the beneficial strains are so depleted that diet and exercise alone aren't enough to recolonize the gut, medical science is rapidly advancing highly targeted direct interventions.
Like what?
The most well-known is FMT, or fecal microbiota transplantation.
Which is exactly as visceral as it sounds, right? Taking the stool and therefore the complete healthy microbiome ecosystem from a heavily screened healthy donor and transplanting it directly into the gastrointestinal tract of a sick patient.
Yes. It's most famous for its near-miraculous success rates in treating life-threatening C. difficile infections where antibiotics have failed. But the therapeutic applications are expanding rapidly into neurology and psychiatry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was a recent, highly compelling clinical trial where oral FMT capsules, essentially freeze-dried healthy bioterrain, were utilized as an add-on therapy for patients suffering from severe major depressive disorder.
Treating clinical depression with a gut transplant.
Exactly. And the results were remarkable. After just 4 weeks of treatment, a significant portion of the patients experienced a marked, quantifiable improvement in their depressive symptoms.
That's amazing.
By physically introducing a healthy, diverse array of microbes, they completely altered the inflammatory signaling along the gut-brain axis. They gave the gut the software it needed to produce the serotonin and GABA the brain was starving for.
And for those who might be squeamish about FMT, there's also the rapidly emerging field of psychobiotics, right?
Yes, psychobiotics represent the next generation of targeted probiotic therapy. Instead of just taking a generic broad-spectrum probiotic off the grocery store shelf, psychobiotics involve utilizing highly specific, clinically verified strains of bacteria.
Like the bifidobacterium strains we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Formulated specifically to boost the endogenous production of neurotransmitters and dampen neuroinflammation to treat mental health issues.
It truly feels like we are standing on the precipice of a complete paradigm shift in internal medicine.
It really does.
We're moving from a model of chemical suppression to a model of ecological restoration. And every single intervention we've discussed, managing the HPA axis stress response, consuming massive amounts of fermentable fiber, exercising to boost Akkermansia, and utilizing psychobiotics all point toward one ultimate overarching goal: extending our healthy lifespan.
Which brings us to the combination of all these mechanisms: longevity, the biology of aging, and what we can learn from our ancestral guts.
When researching longevity and the microbiome, there was a historical touchstone that completely reframed the timeline of the science for me.
Oh, Elie Mechnikov.
Yes, the 19th century Russian zoologist and immunologist who eventually won the Nobel Prize.
Mechnikov was a visionary. He was conducting his observations at a time when mainstream medicine was still utilizing leeches for bloodletting, and the concept of genetics was entirely unknown.
Yet, over a century ago, he made a shockingly prescient claim. He stated unequivocally that death begins in the colon.
That's a bold statement for the time.
Right. He had observed populations of rural Bulgarian peasants who routinely lived past 100 years of age, and he correlated their remarkable longevity and vitality to their daily consumption of fermented sour milk, which was teeming with lactic acid bacteria. Long before we had electron microscopes or the ability to sequence bacterial DNA, he hypothesized a direct causal link between human aging and the balance of microbes in the gut.
And modern gerontology and microbiome science have validated his hypothesis completely. We now understand that aging is not simply a ticking chronological clock within our human cells. It is deeply inextricably tied to the health of our microbial companions.
So what exactly happens to the bioterrain as we cross into old age?
There is a very clear documented shift. As humans age, particularly once we cross the 70-year threshold, the overall diversity of the gut microbiome plummets. We lose the rich variety of species.
Which one specifically?
Well, highly beneficial protective strains like Bifidobacterium longum see a steep, significant decline in their populations.
And nature abhors a vacuum. When the protective strains die off, what fills the space?
Opportunistic pro-inflammatory bacteria start to rapidly overgrow. And this takes us right back to the central mechanism we explored earlier.
The leaking barrier.
Right. More pro-inflammatory bacteria means a degradation of the tight junctions. That leads to more leaky gut, which allows a constant low-grade trickle of LPS toxins into the bloodstream.
Which triggers constant low-grade systemic inflammation.
Exactly. In the longevity field, this phenomenon is officially termed inflammaging.
Inflammaging! That's a great portmanteau.
It is. This chronic, smoldering background inflammation is now recognized as a massive primary contributor to the physical frailty, muscle loss, sarcopenia, joint degradation, and cognitive decline that we typically brush off as just getting older.
But the science tells us this rapid decline is not strictly inevitable.
It's modifiable.
Right. There was a fascinating animal study that proved this concept beautifully. Researchers took a group of aging mice and supplemented their diets with specific strains of Bifidobacterium lactis.
And the results.
The supplemented mice actually experienced a measurable increase in their overall longevity compared to the control group.
That's incredible.
By artificially maintaining the populations of protective bacteria, the researchers successfully suppressed the LPS leakage and reduced the age-promoting effects of systemic inflammation. They essentially slowed down the biological clock of aging simply by fixing the ecology of the gut.
Which is a profound realization. It tells us that if we can implement strategies to actively preserve and cultivate microbial diversity as we age, we can potentially extend not just our lifespan, but our health span.
The number of years we live free of debilitating chronic disease.
Exactly. But to understand what true optimal microbial diversity actually looks like, we have to recognize that the modern Western baseline is already deeply compromised. We have to look outside the industrialized world. We have to look at our ancestors.
This contrast was arguably the most eye-opening part of the entire deep dive for me, comparing our modern industrialized bioterrain with the microbiomes of isolated indigenous populations.
Oh, the Yanomami and Hadza studies.
Yes. Researchers have sequenced the gut flora of the Yanomami tribe, a remote population deep in the Amazon basin, who have had virtually no contact with modern medicine or processed diets, as well as the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania.
The differences in the biological architecture are absolutely staggering. Let's look at the lifestyle inputs first. The Hadza consume an estimated 100 to 120 grams of dietary fiber every single day.
120 grams. Contrast that with the average Westerner, who consumes roughly 10 to 15 grams of fiber a day at best. We're practically eating sterile cardboard compared to them.
We really are. They are foraging for wild, highly fibrous tubers, baobab fruit, and berries. Furthermore, they are constantly interacting with a rich array of environmental microbes. They have their hands in the dirt, they process wild game, they consume untreated water, and they live in close physical proximity to their natural environment.
And the biological result of that lifestyle.
The result is that the Hadza and the Yanomami possess incredibly diverse, highly robust, deeply resilient microbiomes. They harbor complex families of bacteria like Treponema, which are experts at breaking down tough plant fibers that have completely vanished from the industrialized world.
Wow.
In fact, comparative genetic studies show that modern Westerners have lost roughly 50% of the bacterial species diversity compared to these hunter-gatherer groups.
We're operating on half the biological hardware. Half of our internal ecosystem has simply gone extinct.
Yes.
And correspondingly, these remote tribes experience virtually none of the chronic inflammatory diseases that plague the modern West. They don't have metabolic syndrome, they don't have skyrocketing rates of autoimmune disorders, heart disease, or dementia.
Which forces us to confront a vital concept in evolutionary biology:
Right.
the evolutionary mismatch.
What's that?
Well, for hundreds of thousands of years, our human DNA and our microbial partners co-evolved in an environment of high dietary fiber, high physical activity, and rich environmental microbial exposure. Our human genome has remained relatively stable over the last 10,000 years. We are essentially the exact same humans.
But our environment, and consequently our microbiome, has been absolutely devastated in just the last century. We have bombarded this ancient ecosystem with modern forces it's simply never evolved to withstand.
The primary destructive forces are ubiquitous in modern life. Force number one is our relentless exposure to antimicrobial substances. A single course of broad-spectrum antibiotics can indiscriminately wipe out vast swaths of beneficial flora, and some sensitive species may never recolonize.
Right, they just get carpet bombed.
Exactly. We drink heavily chlorinated water designed to kill bacteria. We consume crops sprayed with pesticides and herbicides that disrupt microbial pathways.
And force number two is starvation. Even the microbes that survive the chemical assault are systematically starved because we consume heavily processed, sterile cellular foods, completely devoid of the complex fibers they need to survive.
And force number three, as we explore deeply today, is chronic psychological stress. The relentless, low-grade anxiety of modern life, the emails, the traffic, the financial pressures.
He just keeps the HPA axis perpetually activated.
Yes, flooding the gut with cortisol, mutating the remaining flora, and keeping the gut barrier in a state of chronic permeability.
We have essentially taken the lush, vibrant, highly complex rainforest inside our guts, clear-cut the entire thing, and paved it over to build a sterile concrete parking lot.
That is a stark visual, but biologically it is highly accurate. We are suffering from an internal ecological collapse. However, the deeply optimistic takeaway, the empowering core thesis of all the current research, is that unlike our static human DNA, the microbiome is highly dynamic.
Right, it can change.
It is malleable. It is a living, breathing record of your lifestyle, but it's also constantly updating.
So you aren't permanently locked in. Even if you were born via C-section, fed formula instead of breast milk, took a dozen courses of antibiotics for ear infections as a kid, and ate processed food for 30 years. You can actively change the architecture of your bioterrain starting today.
You have the agency to rebuild the rainforest. If we can restore even a fraction of the ancestral diversity of our gut by radically increasing our intake of diverse, fermentable plant fibers, utilizing targeted probiotic therapies, managing our stress response to lower cortisol, and engaging in regular aerobic exercise, we can physically cool the systemic inflammation that drives chronic disease and accelerates aging. We can unlock an unprecedented level of human health span.
Let's bring this all home for you, our listener. We have covered an immense amount of complex biological territory today.
Really have.
We started by mapping out the 500 million neurons lining your gut, standing as a highly intelligent border patrol between the chaotic outside world and your pristine bloodstream. We traveled up the vagus nerve superhighway, revealing that 90% of the neurological traffic consists of your microbes sending critical instructions up to your brain.
We dissected the devastating power of the HPA axis, observing how unchecked psychological stress unleashes a flood of cortisol that mutates harmless bacteria into aggressive pathogens.
It breaks down the tight junctions of your intestinal barrier and floods your systemic circulation with LPS endotoxins that drive neuroinflammation, depression, and anxiety.
We zoomed in on the mechanics of metabolic syndrome, discovering that obesity and insulin resistance aren't just a matter of failing to count calories.
No, they are deeply dictated by the ratio of energy-harvesting firmicutes to bacteroidates. And whether you are feeding your bioterrain enough fiber to produce those heroic short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate, which act as metabolic peacekeepers to repair the gut lining and keep your cells sensitive to insulin.
And finally, we looked to our ancestors to uncover the evolutionary secret to a longer, healthier life. We confronted the reality that our sterile, highly stressed modern lifestyle has driven half of our internal species to extinction, but that through deliberate daily lifestyle interventions, we have the power to halt inflammaging and rebuild our internal ecology.
It is a fundamentally different, profoundly interconnected way to view your own biology. You are not a single, isolated organism fighting against the world. You are a walking, talking, highly complex ecosystem.
A true symbiotic organism.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
All right, let's hear it.
Think about the sheer volume of influence we just uncovered. If 90% of the neurological communication travels from your gut up to your brain, and your bacterial passengers are actively manufacturing 95% of your serotonin, alongside the GABA and glutamate that heavily dictate your mood, your anxiety levels, your ability to focus, and your physical cravings for food. How much of what you consider to be your distinct personality or your free will is actually originating from human consciousness?
That is the ultimate biological question.
Right. If you were suddenly hit with an intense craving for a sugary donut, or you feel a wave of inexplicable anxiety, or you wake up feeling highly resilient and energized,
Yeah.
is that you making an autonomous choice?
Or is it them?
Exactly. Or is it simply your trillions of microscopic passengers pulling the biochemical levers and steering the ship to ensure their own evolutionary survival?
It forces us to completely redefine what it means to be a human being.
It really does. You are a host. Look after your passengers, and they will look after you. To our listener, thank you for challenging us with such an incredible paradigm-shifting mission today. This has been a truly mind-expanding deep dive, and we hope it equips you with a powerful new perspective on your metabolism, your mental health, and your longevity. Until next time.